Welcome to the voices of transparency and excellence. We're not pivoting, the world is spinning, like a top. Let's stop, figure things out, get some answers. Come with us on this ride. Warm regards, Rick and Judi.
Welcome to our podcast series where we address crucial topics impacting our campus and community. I'm Rick Gatteau, and my co-host and dance partner, Judi Clarke, is out on assignment. Today, we're going to dance through American history by learning how dance is an archival study of people, places, and periods. And we're joined by my longtime colleague, April Masten, who is the undergraduate program director and professor of American history in the Department of History here at Stony Brook University. April, thanks so much for being part of today's episode.
Thank you for inviting me.
Great. So we've known each other for many, many years. So this is really exciting for me. So first, tell me a bit about your background, your research, and why did you get interested in the topic of dance and dance history?
Okay. Well, I was a music major in college, not a history major. And I became a singer-songwriter after that. And I found that a very difficult career. I was back in the kind of mid to late 80s. It was a big music, there was sort of a big women's music group at that time. So I was trying to get into that. So I decided to go back to graduate school and get my degree in history so I could find out why it was so hard for women to make their careers in the arts. And I ended up not writing about music then. I wrote about women artists and published my first book on New York women artists, where there were thousands. Nobody knows about them because it was a different world and there was a different way of thinking about art at that time. And then I came to work at Stony Brook, and here I love to dance. And my husband's not really a dancer. So I thought, wow, I could get this captive dancing group by teaching a class where dance was part of it. And I tried it first in the honors department. There's these kind of short classes that you can do there. I tried it out with those students. They loved it. I loved it. And so then I turned it into a senior seminar. And one of the reasons I thought it would be good for a senior seminar was because seminars are 3 hours long. And what do you do with undergraduates for 3 hours? You don't sit there and talk about a book for 3 hours. It's not the same as working with graduate students. So I designed this class so that they could use their bodies as a place to store knowledge over the course of the semester. People don't think that the body is really part of the intellectual landscape, but in fact, we were designed to move. That's what our bodies are. And I mean, more and more as we're expecting our computers to do things for us, we are disengaging with our bodies. So they don't know that they can learn from their bodies. And I wanted to show my students that they could learn from their bodies. So one of the ways this course is designed is that we read about a certain period of time. And that's usually something I think is an important event of that time. For example, not the first class, that's sort of the mixer. At the end of this class, they're going to know each other really well because they're going to dance together every week. So the first real class is on the African ring shout. So we read about African slavery. We read about slaves coming into this country. We read about their culture. And then they write a little. Usually every week I have them write a little bit about it so that they have really thought about the readings. So we come in, we discuss the readings, then we take a break, then we teach them a dance, and then they dance it for an hour. And then at the end of the class, they sit down with me on the floor and we talk about how dancing that dance taught us something about those people and that time that we didn't know by just reading the readings. And so we connect the readings to our physical experiences. And so I do that through 200 years of American history. So we start out with the ring shout. Then I do Irish immigration. So I teach them how to jig dance. And then I talk about Native American dancing, but we don't actually do that because one of the things that we read about is how dance is a form of economic. That's how people support themselves. And so I don't want to take that away from Native Americans who are among the poorest people in this country. So we talk about that as well as not dancing. I show them. I actually have purchased a film of some dancing they watch. And then we go to the rise of the middle class. And so I have them read about etiquette, and they read about waltzing and different forms of dance like that. They read about how the middle class separated themselves out from the working class. And so I teach them to waltz that week, but I also make them wear white gloves. They have to have dance cards, go around and have them their partners fill out their dance cards. You don't have to teach them very much. You teach them 1 or 2 steps because they're learning it together during the hour that we're dancing, and that works really well. That turns out to be the most popular class with the boys or the male identified people. They love wearing white gloves. They love having to learn how to tip their hats. So that one's really fun. And then when we move on from there, so then I move into tap dancing. So I look at the cultural exchange between Black and Irish people in places like New York City. And then we go on to the migration out into the West. So they learn how to do the Virginia reel, and they read about how migrants into the West were not just these lone pioneers, but they were families. So anyway, each week is a dance that enhances what they've read. And we go all the way up to hip hop. And in fact, the last class we talk about online dancing and what we think, what has that done? Because what really happens is that over the course of the semester, each week, they have this information they're storing in their bodies by having actually tried the dances. So that when we get to the week of tap dancing, they go, I remember this rhythm when we did the ring shout, or isn't this kind of like what we did with the jig? And then they see that, first of all, that African American in this case and other Americans, white Americans of all different European backgrounds, have at some time in the past mingled. Because if they hadn't, we would not actually have these dances. And that's actually what my book is about, my new book, Diamond and Juba, The Raucous World of Challenge Dancing. It looks at where did those people mingle to bring us American tap dance, and in particular this kind of challenge dancing, which was a form of jig dancing that was done like a boxing match with 2 people. It could be 2 women, 2 men, or it could be 2 couples facing off and trying to outdance each other. So it's basically how long you could dance. And then people in the audience bet on who's going to win.
Interesting.
So
let me just go back to the classroom. You shared your syllabus, and I loved one piece of it where you said, dancing is mandatory, but no experience is necessary. Right. So I'm really curious. I love the fact that this is a really active learning experience you're creating and giving content knowledge to then see how it shows up in an expressive way. What do you find are your students' comfort level in terms of dance coming into the course? Do they not realize what they signed up for, and how do they react by the end of the class?
Well, there are always a few that didn't realize what they signed up for, and they're like, "What? We're dancing every week?" What I would say the part of it is not knowing how to do these dances is good, because what they find out something about these people by learning the way that they would have danced. So that's one thing. But they also learn about social dancing, because what happens is everything at the beginning is social. All these different ways people dance together. But when we get into the 1960s and you start doing your own thing on the dance floor and you stop dancing with a partner or dancing with a group of people, it's really different, and they miss it. They miss getting to have that social experience. But when they came in, they did not want to do it. The very first class, I have them break up in groups and choreograph something to some ragtime music. And then each group performs for the other group, and we make it a challenge dance so that at the end, everyone votes on who had choreographed the best dance. So they start immediately working with each other. So although this is a class, it's a senior seminar, they're going to write a big research paper by the end. They have started to engage. And I have to admit that by the end of the class, they love each other. They know each other. They support each other. I had one year a guy in the class who had problems with his legs. He did have some sort of, I don't know if it was an injury or a handicap. But if he fell down, everybody just picked him right back up and kept dancing. I mean, it changes their relationship to each other. I even have on Facebook, there are some April Masten dance class groups.
Yeah. It's interesting. You were saying at the beginning about, and I didn't think about music and dance in this sense, that it was very much couples dancing. And then as dance has evolved, it's become an individual experience, individual expression. Is that a fair characterization?
I would say it is. I mean, certainly when we dance in the classroom, it is a different experience than the people who danced it in the past, because we're dancing it as an assignment in the classroom. So it's different. But we also see how things like swing dancing have come back round. People want to do it again. So it's a different historical context. So even though swing dancing emerges in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, when we do it in the 2020s, it has its own historical context that we can research and find out why is it that people want to do swing dancing? Well, it's partly because of what you said. People want to dance with other people.
So April, one thing we've seen is that, especially even on college campuses, that dance has evolved into the recreation space. So when I think about on our campus around Pilates, Zumba classes, tell me how that is connected to the work that you've been involved in.
I would give you my own experience, which was that as a high school student, I danced modern dance. I did a lot of dancing. I was not one of those kids that started out as a tiny person becoming a ballerina, and I never had a dancer's body. So I wanted to figure out a way to keep dancing as I got older. Well, during my generation, Jane Fonda started her aerobic exercise class, and I taught aerobic exercise to the music I liked. I didn't use what everyone else was using. I used everything I liked, from Irish music all the way to hip hop, and I taught aerobic exercise for 20 years. And then I got here. I wanted a way to dance, and so I developed my Dancing Through History class. And since then, I have gone back home to California, where I'm from, and noticed that these two women that I went to high school with were teaching dance again. So I started a dancing class here.
I love it. It's interesting from the human connection standpoint. I want to get back to the online piece too in a minute. I just so all our listeners know, I did take ballroom dance lessons when I was in graduate school.
You should come and join us.
I hope you invite me, because I would really enjoy that. And you still remember some of the steps and moves. But one thing I remember vividly from that experience, the instructor wanted to make sure that you could dance with any partner.
Yes. Because
you get used to the woman I went with to dance. We learned how to dance together. But she said you needed to be able to then move to the next partner so that you would just kind of develop that rhythm, which goes back to the point about what the power of the couple.
Well, but also the dance cards, because in the 1840s, when waltzing became popular, you were not allowed to dance twice with the same person. That was impolite. And also it meant that there was more going on between you than just dancing partners. So it was, just like
interesting.
She said to you.
Well, the instructor also said something that always stuck with me. And she said, women in the room, this is the only time in life when men lead.
It's very hard to teach the female to let the boys lead.
Yeah.
Because it's not actually, everybody wants to lead.
Yeah, no, it's more the natural instinct to do that.
Only natural because we dance by ourselves now. It would not have been natural when we used to dance. I mean, a lot of these dances are actually social in that you dance across from a partner, but you dance with everybody in the group. If you're doing a Virginia reel, there's a point when you reel every single person in that group.
Right.
You don't just dance with your partner.
Can you walk through a couple of examples, whether it's the waltz or the Lindy Hop or the jig salsa examples, and connected to a social movement and connected to the history for us, so we kind of see the parallel between the dance and history?
Okay, let me think. All right, well, so I'll go with the one that I wrote the book about too. So when I teach tap dancing to them, what I'm teaching them is about the migration and immigration into American cities. So it's really a class about urbanization. So all these people, poor, sort of farming people, come into the cities during industrialization, and then people in Ireland, Germany, and other places come in to America, to the cities, because of either famine or actually even before famine, there's political reasons they leave. So people have all kinds of reasons. So they all meet up in the cities. And in the 19th century, they were thrown together in areas that we would now call ghettos, but at that time they were just the poor areas. And so you lived cheek by jowl, shoulder to shoulder with people that were from different places than you. We don't really do that anymore, not very many of us. And so what they learn about is, what does that kind of historical moment of being in close proximity to other people, what does that do to your culture? I mean, American culture is all about that. Everything in American culture is mixed. Otherwise, it's not American. If you dance a jig in America, it's still Irish unless you add a little African movements to it. Then it becomes an American dance. So those two mixing together. So that would be one way to talk about urbanization. And as I mentioned with the waltz, that was also a kind of a product of this urbanization. People felt like they didn't know anybody who lived around them. You felt like you were kind of stranded in, amongst all these strangers. It wasn't that way when you left your hometown, wherever you were before. So how do you know whether people are con men or they're real middle-class people? So there's this huge problem about con men and painted ladies at that time, people that are pretending to be different than they are so that they can cheat you. So you create this huge etiquette, which includes dancing, that helps people identify sincerity in other people. And so you learn about how does the middle class distinguish itself from the working class, and how do they actually create a community.
So interesting. So let's talk about your book.
Okay.
So it came out, I think in December it just came out,
Just
right?
came out, yeah.
So it's titled Diamond and Juba, The Raucous World of 19th Century Challenge Dancing. So can you share for our listeners who's Diamond, who's Juba, and what is challenge dancing?
Okay. So Diamond is an Irish-American boy named John Diamond. Would have been spelled the Irish way without the A, but he gets picked up by P.T. Barnum, who sees him jig dancing down on the wharves in New York City. Juba is an African-American lad named William Henry Lane, who also gets picked up by P.T. Barnum, who saw him dancing and puts him on the stage. So these two young boys were already working as jig dancers in taverns and on the streets. It was a very, very popular form of dancing. So challenge dancing so when you have an Irish set dance, you have partners that all face each other in a line, and then they dance either a jig or a reel or hornpipe. And it's called a set because usually there's more than one kind of dance in this musical set. It's a set of dance tunes. And then at the end of the set, you kind of challenge your partner and you dance a little different. You show your own steps. Well, those challenges at the end of the set they would get separated out then, and you would have the best couples face off and dance against each other. Or you would have the archest wag, they called it, the funniest dancer, face off with the best dancer, and that might be two men or it might be two women. And so that's where it arises. It's from out of these sort of taverns and other places where lower class people got together. And then because those taverns and those areas were already integrated, these dances become very creolized. And so it's not surprising that these two boys, one Irish-American, one African-American, become rivals. And then this is the story of their rivalry, but also of their careers. I look at the dance as a form of labor, physical labor, very difficult and skilled labor. And so I followed their careers to see where they worked and what they did. And sometimes that working was facing each other and challenging each other. And sometimes it was going off on their own and maybe working on stage. One of the sort of surprising things I found out, which made me almost not want to write this book, was that they both danced in blackface often, even the African-American dancer, because when you danced in blackface, it didn't matter what your dance did, it became an American dance. Because otherwise you might be dancing jigs and everyone says, oh, it's just, European style jigs. There's just jigs. But once you identify yourself as an American, and how you do that, you have to be African American. African American culture is American culture. So they show that they are Americans dancing American dances by wearing blackface. So that was upsetting. But then the other thing was surprising is how close that dancing community was to the boxing community. And boxing was also an integrated sport. And so, the first American champion boxers were two African Americans, this guy named Tom Molyneux and his trainer. They were enslaved people who actually became free by their boxing ability. And then they went to England and they joined the prize fighting circuit in England. And one of them became champion and danced against the champion of England. So
April, you just mentioned about boxing. I love to hear more about the connection between dancing and boxing.
All right. So in my case, dancers boxed and boxers danced. That was one of the things that they did in the 1840s. But that kind of connection has really been maintained right up into the 20th century. For example, I don't know if you've seen the movie about Muhammad Ali was called We Are Kings or something like that. And in it, he shows how he prepares for a fight. And one of the things he does is dance in the boxing ring, dance around the boxing ring to prepare his body to be agile and ready to do that fighting. Dancers and boxers back in the 1840s talked about their science and their art. And the science was learning all how to do it. And if you were a boxer who knew his science, then you knew all the moves and you were able to use your footwork and all that. But there was also boxers who just used their brute skill and they just would try to beat you up. And so there was always a kind of who is better. But so in the dancing community, they also talked about that, whether you had the science, if you were teaching the science of your art.
What's an interesting connection? I also heard you just won an award.
I did. The book just won an award from the Victorian Society of New York.
That's really
very
exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you
That's
so
wonderful
much.
news. I hope you're going to integrate the book in your class. Is that the plan? Or
I have just tried it this semester in my popular culture class. I'll see what the students say about it in their evaluations, but they seemed like they liked it.
Yeah.
It was just one of the readings we had, but I did try it out. Just thought I'd try it out.
Yeah. You shared a little bit about, from a historical perspective, how dance has evolved. Can you talk about, for example, like the Lindy Hop I know was developed by the Black community during the Harlem Renaissance, and how has the Black community played a role in social dance?
Well, they're big social dancers, first of all. I think, as I mentioned, there is always this kind of intermixing between people who are doing creative things. Okay, so you get my two guys, it's an integrated situation. And so they are sharing with each other. So although, some white people are accused of appropriating Black culture, and in fact they do, which basically means you take someone else's culture and you monetize it for yourself. But in the case of Diamond and Juba, for example, they were both dancing the same dance. They both had shared each other's form of dancing. So I don't see it as appropriation unless it's appropriation on both sides. So you get up later, and it's the same thing with the Lindy Hop. Well, where did those white dancers learn to dance the dance that African Americans from the Harlem Renaissance and other, and also off the stage, Black dancing, Charleston, and all those forms were on the stage quite early in the 1900s. Well, turns out places, ballrooms where people were swing dancing, usually the bands were integrated and then the dance floors were integrated as well. They might even cordon them off so the white people danced over here and the Black people danced over there, but they were all there so they could see each other dancing. I mean, today we have the internet and other ways of seeing how other people dance, but at that time you actually had to go and see someone dance. So it was much more physical and right in the presence of other people.
You shared earlier about online, too. Tell me more about what you're seeing in that space and your reaction to it.
Well, it's a wonderful resource. I teach a class for women my age, a contemporary dancing class, and I get lots of ideas by looking at the reels that are online. But I actually teach my class. There was a dance called The Renegade that was danced to that piece, and the girl who did the original choreography was an African-American girl. And the dance got picked up by a white influencer dancer, I guess, who made a lot of money off of it. And so there was a Times article about who owns choreography, right? Who owns the steps? And eventually the Black girl is, in fact, recognized for what she did. So I asked my students to think about what did they think about that situation? What did they think about choreography? They've just learned a lot of different dances and different dances that different people did. And then also what they think about watching dance online rather than actually dancing. And I have to admit, by the end, it would be a different answer at the beginning of the semester and the end of the semester, because by the end, they want to dance.
They're really interesting. So you've covered some of this already, but what are some examples where dance actually wound up challenging either social norms or power structures? I'm just curious, how does the history piece connect to what you've seen in dance?
Well, if we go back to the waltz again, the waltz did have there were anti-waltz people out there. They were in both the white and Black communities. There were anti-dance people in both the white and Black communities because, well, first of all, we think of it, well, maybe it was immoral, right? People are dancing really close together and all that. But it was more that they were wasting their time and that they thought it was, the people who were dancing said, well, but it's good for our bodies. And they would say, but it's not good for your bodies because you expend this energy that you don't need to expend. You could be doing with more important work. And so there's always been any kind of thing that people do for fun, especially when it's created by the people, not for the people. It's not commercial culture, but it's actual popular culture. It gets criticized by people who are outside, who are looking in, who kind of don't understand why people dance.
Interesting.
I hope that helps.
So what's your take on flash mobs?
Well, right now, I've heard that they are in the Monahan, where at the train station.
Oh, Moynihan train station?
Train station. And it's out, I haven't ever been there when one happened, but that would have been really fun. I mean, I was, if you really think, one of the dances that we stopped doing was the mosh pit in my class because I tried it one year, and I had this huge football player in the class, and he goes, "Come on, Professor Masten," and I went running in the middle, and he just banged me right back out. And so that was a little. I thought, okay, no, I don't think I need to do that. But we do read about mosh pits. We read about sort of what white kids were doing, what black kids were doing in the 80s and 90s, because the mosh pit, some people talk about how they were, in fact, a place where people took care of each other. You went in there and you were all doing that together. Maybe you got knocked down, but usually you got picked back up if you got knocked down. Or if you lost your glasses, somebody found them. It was an interesting article. I have the students read about that. And then we also read about how the whole hip-hop era and graffiti and sports like basketball, all were these ways that African-American kids were trying to maybe make a living out of something that they were skilled at. And so we look at that. That was the era of the Great U-turn. The economy has changed significantly, so there's a much wider gap between the poor and the rich after the Reagan years. And so I look at how do we find out how people reacted to that economic change.
Yeah.
That shift.
So 2026, where are we going from here?
You're asking me. I'm a historian.
I know, but the past informs our present and future.
Yeah.
So.
Well, for me, as a 71-year-old woman, it meant that I was going to say, I don't think there's any age at which you're supposed to stop dancing. And so I started teaching dance classes to people my age. Real dance, not just, sit in the chair and dance. This is real dancing. And I get ideas from everywhere. I think that more people want to actually dance now from seeing it online than just want to watch it. I think it's going to be helpful for dancers to have people come back in. But I guess the main thing I would say is that the mind and the body work together. And everything in this culture is trying to say, let something else do it for you. Let AI do it for you. Just type. Don't ever have to learn handwriting. Let someone else do the body stuff for you. No, that's not how you learn. And that's not how you grow and develop and become an intellectual. Your body is part of your whole system of learning, and I just want to show my students that's what.
Yeah, it's really fascinating that as you've shared today, it's obviously a form of self-expression. It actually does speak to the history of our country, of our people, but also as a sense of form of community. It sounds like too.
Oh, absolutely.
So, any final thoughts you want to share with us today? Anything I didn't get to ask you that you wanted to talk about? Or?
I hope that if any students hear this and want to join the class, they will join the class because we always love to have new people in there dancing. I got 2 wonderful awards for this class. I got the Stony Chancellor's Award, and also the American Historical Association gave me a teaching award for this kind of teaching.
And I think it also speaks to, again, your research and work about what I see at Stony Brook over my career too, that dance is such an integral part of the student experience here.
They're dancing all the time. They're out there dancing all their ethnic dances and other kinds of dances. I think with the medical school over there, we should have more performing arts because those are using the body. And
you're right. No, great. Right. Mind, body, as you said. And I'll just make the plug for our Seawolf Showcase every year of our student dance performance groups that are beyond incredible. Well, April, thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise with us today. We hope our listeners find these discussions informative and empowering. And again, for now, I'm Rick Gatteau. Thank you for tuning in.